All right, again, welcome back to Business 101, Introduction to Business, online with Professor Joe Lane on a cold and snowy day here in Monroe, Louisiana. Okay, it's not a cold and snowy day in Louisiana. I just said that to see if you were paying attention or not. It's summertime, or almost summertime in Louisiana, and today is kind of one of those cloudy, almost rainy days. I was looking at chapter 7. I know you're saying, oh gosh, I just saw that video, that's enough of that. Well, but we got into a lot of stuff. We got into a lot of stuff in chapter 7. We laid the foundation: planning, organizing, leading, and controlling. We talked a lot about planning in chapter 7. Strategic, tactical, operational planning, all that stuff, remember? Now, chapter 8, the title of chapter 8 is Structuring Organizations to Meet Today's Challenges. So, planning, organizing. So, this chapter, chapter 8, which is a shorter chapter, by the way, chapter 8 is really more about organizing, the second of those 4 functions that managers perform. I remember looking at those leadership styles. Autocratic, participative, or democratic, and free reign. I mentioned you needed to be able to use all 3. I saw an interesting quote here in the book when I was sitting in the makeup chair, them getting my makeup ready and getting my hairstyle for chapter 8. It was an interesting little sentence. He says, which leadership style is best? Well, we already talked about that. It depends. Research tells us that it depends largely on what the goals and values of the firms are, who's being led, and in what situations. So I think we'd already said we need to be familiar with that. It depends which style is best. All right, and then one big distinction that we made again that I want to recall, and then we'll get really into this organizational chart here. Remember, we talked about these the way I've the way I have drawn this chart. These supervisors right here are supervising employees. And so most managers in an organization, they manage other managers. But this line, we talked about supervisory management. I still have it written up here. These are folks that manage non-managerial employees and lead and guide and direct and control the things that they do. So they're responsible for those non-managerial employees. All right, chapter 8 talks about structuring organizations. Are all organizations going to be structured the same? Well, of course not. Now, I'm going to say some things in chapter 8. I'm probably going to use the term generally speaking. Generally speaking, this is what is happening in 2020. Does that mean it's true in every case? No, it's just the general trend based upon certain things as relate to how we do organizing, or companies organize or structure themselves. So we're going to have some generally speaking in here. Let me look at my handout. I'm going to try to do part of this sitting down, just because it'll keep me focused and moving along. But now I'm setting the stage for chapter 8. So please kind of focus in on some time travel we're getting ready to do. Let's go back a little over 100 plus years, early 1900, when Ford Motor Company was producing Ford automobiles. Now, since I know that y'all are economists, I can use this term with you. Demand was greater than supply. So you know what that means, don't you? That means that every time a Ford automobile rolled off the assembly line, what happened? Well, virtually somebody bought it, because there was such demand for these products that were now being built and beginning to be built during the Industrial Revolution in the United States. People wanted that farm machinery. People wanted those dresses. They wanted those shoes. They wanted those boots. They wanted those Ford automobiles. Okay? So just keep in mind that in the early 1900s, demand was greater than supply. So companies organized for control. Companies organized for control. They wanted to control everything. Think specifically, let's just use Ford Motor Company. We could use anything, but just think specifically of that company to understand what we're saying here. What was the most important thing in the early 1900s as it related to business? The product. If I can get a product out that's reasonable quality at a reasonable cost that I can sell it, I'm going to make a profit. So they focused on the product, because once the product went out, it was going to be sold. So it was all about controlling every aspect of what was going on within that company to make sure that Ford car rolled out of good quality as quickly as possible. And the organizational structure that was best at that is an organizational structure like this one that has a lot of levels of management. This would be called a tall organizational structure. Lots of levels of management. It's called something else too, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But at every level, the managers and the folks were involved in doing things that when that Ford vehicle, when it rolled off the assembly line over here, and there it goes, that it was ready to be purchased. So I'm just going to throw out maybe right here this type of organizational structure, and the organizational structure that was most important in the early 1900s was a structure that gave the company maximum control of everything that's going on, because they've got to get that product out. Got it? You probably do. I know I've said it about 4 times. Okay. In 2020, we've made a statement before, and I'll make it again. In 2020, the customer rules. You have to please the customer. The customer has many alternatives. There's Buicks, and there's Volkswagens, and there's Hondas, and there's Cadillacs, and there's GMs. There's lots and lots of choices. And in 2020, generally speaking, in most cases, supply is greater than demand. If you decided that you wanted to go out and buy a Chevrolet automobile today, I bet you could find one. 2. Lots of them. Supply is greater than demand. If you're going to be successful in 2020, and I'll make this over here when we were talking about this, I'll just make this 1910, 1920. If you're going to be successful with the customer in 2010, 2020, if you're going to be successful, you've got to be responsive to the customer. You've got to be able to respond to their needs. Generally speaking, an organizational structure with lots of levels of management, controlling everything, is best for control. In 2020, generally speaking, a flatter organizational structure where there are fewer levels of management and more people are responsible for more things is a better organizational structure to be responsive. What's the number one thing in 1920? The product. What's the number one thing in 2020? The customer. Would it be reasonable to assume that an organizational structure that is built for control might be a different organizational structure that is built for being responsive? lean and mean, responsive? The answer would be yes. All right. So we've got to know. I shouldn't use the word know because that perks up your ears. We've got to understand, that here we're talking about control. Here we're talking about being responsive. All right. Different times. And I started off our little handout. You can say, okay, that's just one page. That's good, huh? One page with some blank spots at the bottom. That must mean maybe we can get through with this before it quits snowing. Okay, just kidding. In the past, it's all about control. Today, it's all about satisfying the customer and making a profit. You got to satisfy the customer. I keep saying that, but you got to do it at a profit, don't you? Okay. All right. All right. So let's play with these different eras and let's talk about these different things. In the early 1900s, Henry Ford was producing Ford automobiles. What kind of organizational structure did he need? Well, he needed one for control. Well, did he just go to a book and figure that out? No, in the early 1900s, you were kind of having to learn this stuff. You were having to invent this stuff. You were having to discover this stuff. You were having to put together these things about management and organization and that type of thing. So in the early 1900s, there were a couple of organizational theorists. These were thinkers. These were people that studied organizations, organization effectiveness, and the best type of organizations for situations. The two of them that I put down in here for us was Henry Fayot and Max Weber. It's actually Weber, but he's German, but it looks like Weber, so that's what I'm going to call him. Henry Fayot, and I'm going to use this structure here because it's a tall organizational structure to represent control, and we're talking in the early 1900s. Henry Fayot came up, he said, here's some principles of organization. Here's some things that when you're putting together your organizational structure for your company, here's some principles that you need to understand and use. All right, I think I have them over here. This is early 1900s. He wrote this. Here's some principles, he said. Unity of command. Each worker is to report to one and only one boss. Hierarchy of authority. All workers should know to whom they report. Authority. Managers have the right to give orders and the power to enforce obedience. A little bit different sound back then. Clear communication for all channels. Clear communication channels. Equity. A manager should treat employees fairly. Esprit de corps. A spirit of pride and loyalty should be created. These are some principles that Henry Fayot said you should have within your organization. Hey, are some of these still pretty good 100 years later? Not in every situation, but still in most situations, employees report to only one boss. There is a hierarchy of authority. Who reports to whom? Division of labor. Functions are divided into areas of specialization. You divide up the things you do in your business by certain areas, departmentalizing them. We'll talk more about that later. So the thing about Henry Fayot, I just want you to be familiar with, is that he was an organizational theorist, and basically he came up with principles of organization such as unity of command. Okay. Max Weber, he was looking specifically at organizational structures, and he's the one that came up with an organizational structure like this. That tall structure, many layers of management, this is the kind of structure you need for control. So I won't exactly say that Weber invented the pyramid-shaped organizational structure, but he certainly popularized it. He certainly said this is the structure you need for control. Early 1900s. This type of organizational structure is called a bureaucracy. A bureaucratic organizational structure has many levels of management. I'd be familiar with Henry Fayot. I'd be familiar with bureaucracy. Now, the word bureaucracy a lot of times in 2020 denotes something that's not particularly good. That place of business, that place is nothing but a bureaucracy. That means you go in there and you can't get anything done, and they don't know what they're, so it kind of has a bad term. But as Max Weber was thinking of the bureaucracy, a bureaucratic organization with a hierarchy of command, chain of command. You have a hierarchy of every person knows to whom they are reporting to up and down the organizational chain. There's a chain of command, there's a hierarchy of authority up and down. I'd just be familiar with Weber, I'd be familiar with the bureaucratic organizational structure, many levels, chain of command, and hierarchy of command. Okay, so those are the two folks I want us to kind of be familiar with. Let me go off camera for a minute. I'll be right back. I had a ding on my phone over there, and I wanted to see if it was anything particularly serious or not. Not just some information to give to me for, if you watch the other video, having hamburgers at the house later on this afternoon, so just giving me some instructions. Everything's good. Now, when we go from chapter 8 now, after we've talked about these early organizational theories, it says, okay, when you're putting together an organizational structure, there are some things that have to be considered. There are some issues that you have to consider on how you want to do it. And I put that in here, issues involved in structuring. Now, I'm not saying it's not good or bad, it's just how do you want to do it? Okay. The first one is, do you want centralized or decentralized authority? I'd like for you to know what centralized and decentralized authority is. Let's help us. If something is centralized, what does that mean? It's pretty much together, right? If you had centralized authority in your organization, where would that authority be? More than likely, in the top. You would centralize it in the top, where the top would make the majority of decisions. Some decisions made, but the majority of decisions would be made at the top. That's centralized authority. So the further down you get within the organization, the less decisions that are made. Even lower level management and everything simply kind of carry out what's already been planned for them. There's not a lot of authority that they have on their own. In 1919, 1920, most organizational structures that had the bureaucracy for control had this type of centralized organizational structure to make sure that most of the decisions were made at a higher level. Probably better for control. Decentralized authority is when you push decision making down through the organization. Here's the idea. I want decisions to be made at the lowest level that they can best be done. In other words, if this employee can make this decision on their own and can make it well, there's no reason for this person to make it. If this person can make this decision, it shouldn't move up. In other words, instead of keeping most decision making at the top centralized, there are some decisions that will continue to be made at the top. They're top level decisions. But we're going to push decision making as far down as that whatever level can best equip to make that decision, they should make it. All right. Remember we talked in chapter 7 about something really important you need to do is to empower your employees. When your employees are working at the place of business, whether they're at Johnny's Pizza or whether they're at a retail store or wherever they happen to be, Delta Community College, should your employees be able to make certain decisions and take certain actions and have certain responsibilities because they are able to handle it? Not only are they able to handle it, they're best able to handle it. So you're going to empower them. You want to empower employees, at the lowest level, you want to push down empowerment. So you want the right people making the right decisions and everything. Okay. So if you're going to empower employees, which is the trend in 2020, and I'll sum this part in just a second. If you're going to have empowered employees, are you going to have centralized or decentralized authority? It's got to be decentralized. Because if you keep all of your authority at the top, you're not going to be able to empower your employees, because what is empowering employees? Giving them the authority and responsibility to do the job that they've been told that they need to do. Okay. Now, let me ask you something else. Let's talk about Mr. or Ms. Customer coming in. If Mr. or Ms. Customer comes into a company, a business, to buy something, is it probably going to be better for that customer if that employee they see is empowered or not empowered? Do you want an empowered employee? Yes. You want those employees that are really representing the company to the customers, you want those employees to be able to do the things they need to do to take care of me as a customer. Do you have any size 10.5 New Balance so-and-so racing shoes? Well, I don't have any. I don't know. Let me go check with my boss. My boss says that, 15 minutes later, my boss says we don't have any, but they're on order. When do you think you'll get them? Oh, I don't know. Boss, when are we going to get those new shoes? Oh, I don't know. You need to ask so-and-so. Oh, okay. When are we going to get those? You see what I'm saying? Wouldn't it be a whole lot better if you walked in, do you have any size 10.5 New Balance so-and-so running shoes? And that employee could say, yes, we do. What color would you like? Or if they say, no, we don't, we have them on order, the truck should be here Thursday night. Which is being more responsive. And that's the deal. In 2020, it's not about control. Remember, it's about being responsive. And generally speaking, organizational structures are going to cut out some of that middle management stuff. They're going to squash that organizational structure down, and it's wider and it's going to be flatter. Less employees, with employees empowered at each level to be able to take care of those things you need to take care of. That way, being flatter, you're being more responsive. Does that make sense? Now, again, you heard about generally speaking. In 2020, are there some organizations that are structured in a bureaucratic manner? Well, sure. I'm not saying in 2020 you eliminate all bureaucratic organizational structures, but I will tell you this. Generally speaking, if you are the kind of business that interacts with customers on a regular basis, your organizational structure is going to be more effective almost always if it's a responsive, flatter structure as opposed to a multi-layered bureaucratic control structure. Okay. So, centralized, decentralized authority. I want you to know the difference. I want you to know what each one of them is and the difference between the two. Span of control. Span of control is how many workers can a supervisor effectively supervise? Now, usually if you were in class, I'd ask that question. I'd say, look, I know it's not a fair question, but how many employees should a supervisor be able to employ? Just give me a number. And I'd hear 4, 6, 10, 20, 19, 34, but most of the students in the room would say, well, it depends. I say, I know that, I know it depends, but just give me a number, the best you can. And they would give me a number. Okay. And then we talked about, well, what does it depend on? Well, it depends on how good the supervisor is, how many people they can supervise, how good the employees are, what type of work the employees are doing. Are the employees geographically dispersed? Are they closer together? It depends on a number of different things. But when it comes to, but let me go with this, on span of control. Generally speaking, in 2020, should a manager is a manager going to supervise more or less employees? Mixed answers. In 2020, you want to be responsive to your customer. To be responsive to the customer, you're going to get rid of some middle management. And you're going to squash your organizational structure down where it's wider. If it's wider, does that mean you're going to be supervising more or less people? More people. Because of the fact that you have empowered folks. By the way, you should be able to supervise more empowered employees. If employees are empowered, they've got the authority and responsibility to do what they need to do. They don't have to come running to you every few minutes. So in 2020, more responsive organizational structures are the flatter organizational structures. But if you're going to have a flatter, wider organizational structure, supervisors are going to have to be able to supervise more. They have to have a wider span of control. But I do want you to be familiar with what span of control is. It's simply the number of folks that a supervisor can effectively supervise. But if you have good people and you empower them and you're a good supervisor, you should be able to handle more. Flat versus tall. We've already beat that to death. Tall organizational structure, controlled. Flat organizational structure, responsive. Be familiar with that. Departmentalization. How do you divide your business up? Now, the way I normally handle this in class is I'll ask somebody, where do you work? Where do you work? And they'll say, well, I work at Walmart. And I'll say, well, how do you divide Walmart? What kind of departments do you have in Walmart? Well, we have the grocery department, we have the meat department, we have women's clothing, men's clothing, we have the automotive department, we've got the electronics department, we've got the pharmacy, and then different other companies have different ways and different departments. You set up, that's called departmentalization. I want you to be familiar with what that is. Dividing of organizational functions into separate units. You don't have just everything out there, just everywhere. You divide up by departments in such a way that best meets the needs of your company and your customers. Okay? So that's what departmentalization is. Now, I've put on your handout, I want you to be familiar with that. I've put on your handout, and I'm ready to go crazy here and mess this up. I need one more. I'm going to make this company right here, I'm going to make this General Motors. All right. This is General Motors. If you can't see it, maybe you can just hear me. This is the Chevy Motor Division right here. That's in black. Blue is going to be the Buick Motor Division. And red is going to be the GMC. Now, I know there's more than that, but let's just go with this. All right. Now, this is the GMC Motor Division of General Motors. Now, this line goes on down here. So, this is GMC. Now, this over here, this is GMC Manufacturing right here. This is GMC Research and Development. This is GMC Accounting and Finance. And this is GMC Sales. All right, now I'm going to cheat because it's easier for me. So I'm going to take this blue line here, and I'm going to move it over here. And I'm going to move sales down. All right, now. Sales, this is sales in the north, this is sales in the mid-east, this is sales in the south, this is sales in the west, this is sales in the far west, and this is international sales. South, then I'm moving it down here to this level. This is farmers. This is suburbanites. This is B.Tech faculty, because I have a GMC. All right, so what am I doing? I am departmentalizing. I am putting together this business in the way that I think I can best be responsive to my customers, okay? All right, now let's look at this. Departmentalization, there's different ways you can do it. I departmentalized at this area, on this area, by Chevy, Buick, and GMC. What are Chevy, Buicks, and GMCs? They're our company's what? Products. So I departmentalized by product. Now this next level, I went down here to manufacturing, research and development, accounting and finance, and sales. This would be GMC sales, GMC manufacturing, GMC research and development, GMC accounting and finance. These are functions, different functions. So I departmentalized by function there. This next level, north, south, east, west, I was departmentalizing geographically. And then down here, I was departmentalizing by farmers, B.Tech faculty, suburbanites. I was departmentalizing by customer. So you can see I departmentalized here different ways. Could I have changed it up and departmentalized another way? Yeah. Could I change my departmentalization if I want to? Yes. You know, a lot of times now, companies used to do just one thing. I think there was a day when Walmart was just a Walmart. And then Walmart added groceries into their supercenter. Then they added pharmacies. Then they added automobile. So what I'm saying is companies are continually maybe changing their structures. They're changing how they departmentalize. To do what? To be responsive to the customer. So I just want you to be familiar with what departmentalization is. Dividing up of organizational functions into different units. You just think about where you work or where you've worked or a place that you shop. How do they break everything up? How do they departmentalize? Okay. Organizational models. Let's look at a few things here and be through with this chapter. All of these people here, they are in the direct chain of command. I can trace each one of them, the line from top to bottom of this organizational chart. All of these people here in some sort of way are involved with producing the good or service. They're involved in the day-to-day operation of doing what needs to be done to produce a good or a service for the consumer. These people are called line people because they are in the line of authority, the chain of command of folks that are involved in doing whatever it is this company does. So that's what line personnel. Part of the chain of command, responsible for whatever it is that they're trying to do. Staff personnel. You talk about line and staff. Some companies have staff personnel. Now let me go up here, and I know I have made a mess. Let me look at my screen. Oh my gosh. Okay. I hope if you're looking at a larger screen than I am, and you're listening to me, you can kind of make heads or tails out of this. I'm going to draw, this is the CEO. I'm going to draw a line over here. Actually, I'm going to draw a dotted line over here. Like this. And right here I'm going to put legal department. Okay, if this were General Motors, would they need a legal department? They might. That legal department, in case there's some new federal guidelines that comes down, because if there's some recall things that happen, what if there's some situation that it says, hey, because of such and such on this vehicle, it caused injury to people or something like that. So I can see the need for a legal department at General Motors. Does the legal department help build the car? Are they involved in the day-to-day line of what's going on? No, they're not line personnel, L-I-N-E. They are staff personnel. They advise and assist the CEO and others in legal matters. I want you to be familiar with what a line person is. I want you to be familiar with what a staff person is. Oh my gosh, a matrix organization. Let's say that General Motors got an order from the federal government to build some vehicles for the military. It was $100 million order to build some vehicles for the federal government. The vehicle is going to be called the Bummer. We just got an order to build 25,000 Bummers, or whatever number it would be. That's not money, that's numbers, sorry. 25,000 Bummers. All right, so how are we going to go about building those things? I mean, we can't go out and hire people to build a Bummer. I mean, people, they don't know how to build vehicles. Would the smart thing be, let's take some people within our organizational structure. Right up here at this highest level, maybe the executive vice president in charge of Chevy division. Maybe that person should continue as the executive vice president of Chevy, but also wear a second cap and become the head of the Bummer division. Does that make sense? Then let's pull other people out of our organizational structure. Now, when I say pull them out, that's not exactly right. They're going to continue to do what they're doing here. Really good people, seasoned people, experienced people. They're going to continue to do what they do here, but not on a full-time basis. They're going to be taking care of their jobs here, but they're also going to be a part of the new Bummer organizational structure that's going to build the Bummer automobile. So you've got good, seasoned, experienced people that we're putting on this special $100 million project. Is that okay? Does that make sense? This would be a matrix organization. If I had read you the definition of a matrix organization before we did that little illustration, I don't think it would have made much sense. I hope it makes more sense to you now. So let's try it. A matrix organization. An organization in which specialists from different parts of the organization are brought together to work on specific projects, but still remain part of the line and staff. Does that make sense? That makes sense? A matrix organization, the Bummer, that's a matrix. A matrix is where you bring people from here to not only continue doing what they're doing here, but also be a part of the Bummer. Then you've got good, experienced people to make this Bummer project a success. Are you probably going to compensate those people more because they're probably working longer hours? Yeah, you're going to have to do some things as a result that you're having those people wear two hats. Now, when the Bummer project is over and the Bummers are delivered, then these people go back to their regular job and this goes away. Does that make sense? That's a matrix. All right. What if the military was so happy, they said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to start ordering Bummers continually. We're going to be your Bummer customer. But would you keep it as a matrix organization? You wouldn't, because these people can't keep wearing two hats forever. What you would do is you'd come out here, you'd set up another division within your organizational structure, and this would become the bummer division. You would staff it with some folks from your other divisions. You would hire additional people for the bummer division, and then you would supplement with additional people going in here. That way you would have some new people in here, some experience, maybe some people that already worked on the bummer project. Let them come back to the bummer, fill out that part of that organizational structure, and then fill in any gaps you lost here. Okay? That's the bummer. Restructuring. I want you to be familiar with what the bummer is. I want you to be familiar with what the matrix is. It doesn't have to be the bummer. Be familiar with what a matrix structure is. Restructuring. Probably have no idea what that is, do you? Oh, somebody said changing the structure? That's it. Should companies restructure? Sure. If it's what? Having them be responsive to the customer. Hey, you know what? Ain't anything to do today. Let's restructure. No. Only, change is inevitable. Businesses, change is constant. You'll never get back to the point in the world of business where when everything levels out, everything's going to be the same. Never is things always the same. The new norm in business is continual change. Technology changes, people change, society changes, and businesses have to change with it. As a result of that, businesses are continually needing to be restructured. Look at CenturyLink. It is not complete, but it has restructured itself tremendously. It went from a regional company to a worldwide company. Delta Community College, you know where we started? Camp Road, the Camp Road facility of Delta Community College? That used to be Ouachita Vocational Technical School. We had 2 rooms in there. We started out with 2 rooms in there, and that 2 rooms within the Ouachita Vocational Technical College was Delta Community College. Look where we are today. Not only are we, where I'm sitting, is this huge 4th-story building, but now the Vocational Technical Center over there is now a part of Delta Community College, as are all the other regional centers are now part of the college. All right, it's really changed a lot. That's what restructuring is. He talks about informal and formal organizations. I think that's the last couple of things in this chapter, so let's hit that. All this mess I have put on the board, this is the formal organizational structure. At Delta Community College, we have a chancellor. We have several vice chancellors. We have division chairs in the academic area. We have faculty. We have coordinators. That's our formal organizational structure. Okay? Every business is going to have a formal organizational structure. But what if it's just you? Well, you're it. You're the formal structure. If you want to argue with me, okay, it takes 2. If it's you and somebody else, then we got an organizational structure, okay? So basically, there's a formal organizational structure. They're different. Some are tall, some are flat, some are this, some are that. Some are departmentalized one way, some are departmentalized the other way. You understand. But every organization has a formal organizational structure. Where authority and responsibility and all this stuff run. Within every organization, there is also an informal organizational structure. Just informal communications, informal getting together, just informal stuff. Okay? I guess within the formal organizational structure, I'm a faculty member. Okay, and you are, students here in class. Well, I don't guess I have to talk to you, I can talk to you about business stuff, but that's all. I'll talk to you about the chapter 8, don't talk to you about anything else. Well, that's not the way I operate. I like to get to know my students. I like to talk about stuff. I like, I like to do informal type conversation. I like to get to know you. This is one of the things it's not my favorite about online. It's because I don't get to know you this way. All of my classes so far for the fall are face-to-face classes. Now again, we have to wait and see what's going to happen with the coronavirus, but right now I'm scheduled to teach 8 face-to-face classes. I've loved doing this online. It's been a great challenge to me. Professor Pierce, my boss, and Dr. Natalie Campbell have really made it possible because they've really helped me so much to really put together an online deal. Okay, but am I anxious to get back and see people, to talk to people face to face? Yeah, I am. But within every business, think of places that you've worked. There's that formal structure, but isn't there just informal stuff? Will you talk to your boss, or you talk to your boss's boss, or something like that? Dr. Corsai is our Vice Chancellor of Academic Affairs. He's several levels above me. If I see him in the hall, and I talk with him, that's just informal. That's the informal organizational structure. I want you to be familiar with the formal structure and what it is. I want you to be familiar with the informal structure. Here's what I want you to be familiar with also. You can't be either one of them. You have to have a formal structure. An informal structure is just normally going to happen. People are just normally going to talk. Friendships are going to develop, things like that. Well, sometimes people say something is not true. Well, I know that. It just happens sometimes when you have an informal structure. But if you're as a supervisor or you're a manager and you're trying to stamp out the informal organizational structure, you're wasting your time. But I don't like some of the things that they say or do. I think they're putting out some misinformation. Well, most of the time, informal structures are not worried about misinformation. They're just personal type talking and stuff. But let me address that problem with you. Let's say that's true. Let's say people are putting out misinformation. Could it be that they're putting out misinformation because the formal organizational structure is not giving them the correct information, or is not giving them the information they should give them? Maybe the formal structure is not interacting with the employees as well as they should, making them as a part of as much as they should make them a part of things, involving them maybe in decision making, maybe doing a company newsletter, maybe doing company meetings, or maybe doing departmental meetings. So I'm not saying you can ever, always totally stamp out the rumor mill, or you can stamp out something that's inaccurate coming from the informal organization. But I can say that you can make it much, much less of a problem if the formal organizational structure communicates with and works with employees at all levels in the proper manner. I think. That's chapter 8. I don't think chapter 8 was as long as chapter 7. We've got the only no in chapter 8 was know what centralized and decentralized authority is, and the difference between the two. We have finished chapter 8. Let me tell you something. Let me get you excited. Chapter 9 is the shortest chapter in the book. So I'm getting ready to have, redo the makeup, get the hair fixed and everything, take a little break, and then I'm going to come back and do chapter 9. That may be a while between the time you watch 8 and you watch 9, or you may be just going to go right on to the next one. But chapter 9 is a short chapter. It's got some great stuff, but it's a short chapter. So I'm going to erase all this mess. I'm going to set up for chapter 9, and I'm going to be back in just a few minutes and do chapter 9. Professor Pierce is expecting that loud noise to show that I have finished chapter 8. I will do that, and I'll see you in chapter 9.